I think unless, all right.
You're
So,
all on notice.
well, thank you again for joining us. And yeah, as I said at the very beginning, for those of you who were with us, I really think there's, there are things that we're definitely not going to miss about having these meetings on Zoom as we return to in-person meetings, hopefully starting on the 10th of May. But one of the advantages is being able to drop in and share updates from all different parts of the county and even as far afield as Massachusetts, apparently. So, with that in mind, I'd like to kick off our round of updates on important issues facing us as we head into this election season and everything else. So I think we were going to toss it to Barbara Sopel to introduce where we are with the whole P3 proposal on the Beltway.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, it's Barbara Soufal, C-O-U-F-A-L. I'm co-chair of Citizens Against Beltway Expansion, or CABE. And CABE is a coalition of Maryland residents and civic associations. We're a volunteer organization. I'm a volunteer. We not only oppose the expansion of the Beltway, but we also oppose adding toll lanes to I-270. And I'm going to give you an update on Governor Hogan's plan to add toll lanes to the Beltway and I-270. Some of you may know that the original plan called for adding 2 toll lanes on each side of the Beltway from the American Legion Bridge all the way over to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and then up I-270 from the spur to the interchange at I-370, which is north of Rockville. There has been substantial opposition. This project is quite controversial, but I would say that it was most controversial in Silver Spring and that area where there were going to be some homes taken in order to do this project. And so last May, the governor decided, MDOT, Maryland Department of Transportation, decided to scale back the project. And they're not going to do the entire Beltway, or they don't plan to do the entire Beltway. They are now planning to add the toll lanes to 495 from the American Legion Bridge up to the I-270 spur. And then they'll add the toll lanes to I-270 from the spur up to the interchange at I-370. This has been a really exasperating experience working against this project because, frankly, MDOT is frequently not telling the truth, and Governor Hogan are frequently not telling the truth about the impact of this project. And what's most frustrating is that their own data in their supplemental draft environmental impact statement shows that it's not going to reduce commuting time for people who use the regular lanes in that corridor. Rodolfo actually knows all of this even better than I do. But if you travel in the general lanes, not the toll lanes, but the general lanes after they're built, according to MDOT, their data shows you will save 2.5 minutes on your morning commute from I-370 to the American Legion Bridge. But when you turn around and go home that evening, your commute is going to be 10 minutes longer. So between the American Legion Bridge and the I-370 interchange. And so, over the course of the day, your commuting time is actually going to be 7.5 minutes longer than it would have been, according to MDOT's own data. So their project completely fails the vast majority of people who will remain in the general lanes. You will only be helped if you can pay the tolls to get into the toll lanes. And the tolls will vary depending on how bad congestion is. They'll be higher if congestion is more severe. And the way they've designed the tolls, they could be as high as $50 one way for that 12-mile stretch of toll lanes. So these are, this is an expensive endeavor. Most people will remain in the general lanes, but they'll be not helped at all. They will be spending more time in traffic, more time in traffic congestion than they would if the toll lanes were not built. So that is the most important thing to know, is that this project will not work. At this time, the Maryland Department of Transportation plans to issue a final environmental impact statement on the project in May. Once the final environmental impact statement is issued, the federal government will decide whether or not to approve the project. The federal government will take 30 days or more before issuing its decision. And this is to allow the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Park Service, and other federal agencies to assess the final environmental impact statement. So we could have a decision from the federal government as soon as June, but the deadline could slip, or the date could slip. It could come later, especially if the federal government decides to take more time reviewing the environmental review. If the federal government does approve the project this summer, early this summer in particular, MDOT then would turn around and negotiate construction contracts with Transurban and submit them to the Maryland Board of Public Works in the fall. Once the Maryland Board of Public Works approves the contracts, Transurban could break ground. And Governor Hogan is working hard. He wants to get everything wrapped up, and he wants the shovels in the ground before the end of the year, before he leaves office. There are 3 people on the Board of Public Works who will be deciding whether to approve the construction contracts, if they get that far. The 3 people are Governor Hogan, Comptroller Peter Franchot, and State Treasurer Derek Davis. Unfortunately, Peter Franchot, the Comptroller, supports the toll lanes. So he will join with the governor in voting to approve contracts. So he's not, he's been on the wrong side of the issue from the very beginning. So we cannot expect anything to happen in the Board of Public Works really that will stop this project from going forward. However, as I said before, the federal government has to approve this project. And we believe that that the federal government could reject the toll lanes because the MDOT, Maryland Department of Transportation's environmental review is really flawed. For example, the draft environmental impact statement that MDOT issued in October did not include an analysis of whether the project will lead to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. They also failed to provide an environmental justice analysis to show whether the negative consequences of the toll lanes would fall disproportionately on low-income communities or communities of color. And these 2 omissions are no ordinary flaws. President Biden issued an executive order directing his agencies to make decisions on projects that prioritize climate change and environmental justice. So that's why we think that there are good reasons for the federal government to reject the project outright, or at least to insist that MDOT complete a greenhouse gas emissions analysis and an environmental justice analysis and make it available for the public to review and comment on it. But we can't wait to see what the federal government will do. We need to take action ourselves. So we are urging folks like yourself to contact Senators Chris Van Hollen, Senators Cardin and your representative, I think for most of you, it sounds like it's Jamie Raskin. Just call their office, tell them that you oppose the toll lanes and that you want to know what the senators or representative is going to do to stop them. The message just has to be very simple, that you are opposed to these toll lanes. You can explain why, that would be fine. But the point is, I oppose these toll lanes, and I want Senator Van Hollen, Senator Cardin, Jamie Raskin to stop them. It's that simple. And if they get enough pressure, they'll be more likely to tell the US Department of Transportation that they think that the toll lanes are a bad idea, that they should be carefully scrutinized, especially given the flaws in the environmental review. So I'm going to give you some phone numbers. I hope you have pen and paper, or pencil and paper. There, Nicholas does. Okay. Senator Cardin's phone number to his office is 202-224-4524. The phone number to Senator Van Hollen's office is 202-224-4654. And for Representative Raskin, thank you to the typist putting it in the chat. Raskin is at 202-225-5341. And was there anyone who's not in? Someone said they were from Howard County. Yes, you have those correct. Thank you. So I'm trying to think, who's the representative in Howard County?
I think there are a few, but I think we could.
Should be
share a link
Sarbanes.
to.
Could be Kwesi Mufume. All right, well, so let me go on and let me figure that out, and then
We can share a lookup too, so people can look that up.
put it in the chat. Okay. So now going back to my update after I've made a pitch, which I hope you will you will follow through on. Some of you have probably read that there has been a lawsuit challenging the award of the contract to Transurban, or actually it's Accelerate Maryland Partners, which is a consortium that's led by Transurban. The lawsuit was filed by Capital Express Mobility Partners, which is another consortium that bid on the project and lost out to Transurban. They filed a lawsuit. They are arguing that Transurban has submitted a proposal which low bids the project, which puts taxpayers at risk of having to subsidize Transurban later on. They argue that it also would create disruption because it will be hard for them to find contractors, subcontractors who will do the work at a cost to come into their financial limit. So where the possibilities are, again, subsidies from the taxpayers, or the kind of disruption we've seen with the Purple Line, where construction, where they can't keep it on time because they're not able to get their subcontractors lined up. So there are some great risks if what Capital Express Mobility Partners says is true. And it's interesting to note that the attorney working for Capital Express Mobility Partners is Doug Gansler, who is running for governor in Maryland. So there's that's just sort of an interesting bit of information. Now, Maryland Department of Transportation is saying that this lawsuit is not going to upset anything. And in fact, Transurban is even telling their investors it's not going to upset the timeline or the project. But I think, we're keeping our eye on it. But again, I think that because the governor is pressing hard to go ahead and get these contracts signed, we really cannot we can't wait for the lawsuit to play out. We need to engage our federal lawmakers and make sure that they are pressing the Department of Transportation, the US Department of Transportation, to reject this project. So I also wanted to flag something that Ben Ross sort of uncovered recently from the Maryland Transit Opportunities Coalition. I'm sure you all know Ben. Last summer, the Regional Transportation Planning Board, which is an entity of the Metropolitan Council of Governments, last summer, they voted to put the toll lanes project in their long-term transportation plan. And they have to do that in order for the federal government to approve the project. So this had to be done in order for MDOT to advance the project. But what they approved and put in their long-term plan was phase 1, from the American Legion Bridge up to the spur, up I-270. They left out the rest of the Beltway. But now Ben has found in some Council of Government documents that they have quietly put the entire Beltway expansion into the long-term plan, even though the Transportation Planning Board did not vote for that, and even though the Maryland Board of Public Works has not voted for that. They are undoubtedly doing this at the behest of the Maryland Department of Transportation. So that shows you how determined MDOT is to do not just, phase 1, but to do the entire Beltway. And if they succeed in getting phase 1 advanced and sign contracts for it, it will be very hard to stop them from doing the rest, from expanding the rest of the Beltway. So this is where we have to make our stand and make sure that Transurban does not get a foothold in Montgomery County on the Beltway. We have to do that now, or on I-270. But let me reiterate, we think we have a very good chance of stopping the toll lanes by engaging our federal lawmakers, Van Hollen, Cardin, Raskin, the others, and let them know that we're opposed to the toll lanes and that we want them to do something about it to stop them. So I'm gonna stop there. I can just want to flag that you can go to www.cabe495.com for more information. If you're interested in getting a yard sign to put in your yard, let me know that. I'd be happy to get a yard sign to you. My email address is bcoufal10@aol.com, and I can get a yard sign to you. So are there questions from anyone?
Barbara, I had a question. This is Kate Stewart. Could you go back to what you said about the Transportation Planning Board, including it in their plan? Because I serve on the board of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And so I'm really, and we could talk about this offline, but I'm very curious about how that got in after everything that transpired,
Yeah. So it was, we're assuming that they're doing it at the behest of MDOT. And I guess, Kate, what I would like to suggest is I'll have Ben Ross reach out to you, because he's the one who found the documents with this information. It's actually part of the Thrive documents with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. So let me have him get in touch with you. Does he know how to get a hold of you?
He should. It's easy. I mean, it's kates@tacomaparkmd.gov for my mayor, or it's on the city website.
Okay,
He
okay.
should have
I'll
my
have him
info.
reach out to you and he can explain exactly where he found it.
Okay. Just happy to, anyway, follow up.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. I know that he's also spoken to Bridget Newton, the mayor of Rockville,
Yes.
about this, who's also on the Transportation Planning Board.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
and Bridget and I work closely together, so, and yeah, happy to work with her on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yes.
So does CABE have any position on separating the American Legion bridge from the rest of the widening project?
So we have not taken, so let me sort of start with some points. We oppose doing this through a public-private partnership, doing anything through a public-private partnership. We oppose expanding the Beltway, but one of the reasons we oppose expanding the Beltway is because they're using a public-private partnership, which is not the most financially advantageous way for the citizens, for the people of Maryland. There is a need to rebuild the American Legion Bridge eventually. And the question then is, would it be expanded or would it just be rebuilt? And we have not taken a position on that. What we have argued is that it's not urgent to do anything right now on the American Legion Bridge based on comments that MDOT has made in the last year describing the condition of the American Legion Bridge. And number two, that if we do something to the American Legion Bridge, if we rebuild it, we should be adding transit, rail transit to the American Legion Bridge. So that becomes, the substitute for adding lanes. So does that answer your question, Sunil?
Sure. When you say urgent, what is your understanding of urgent?
Well, so right now, in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement that came out in October, MDOT made a statement about, the bridge that the bridge needed to be replaced within 10 years. And that contradicted all of the other comments that Secretary Slater, who has been the Secretary of Transportation up until recently, that contradicted the statements he has made in testifying to the General Assembly. What he had said previously is that the bridge needed to be redecked. It didn't need to be replaced, but it needed to be redecked. So there did need to be some renovations done to it. And he previously said within the next 15 years, even if it is within the 10 years, redecking is not the same as, rebuilding replacing it. It's not the same as replacing. That replacing it is a much bigger endeavor. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm also wondering about the political implications. I mean, is there a need to offer something, a more positive agenda rather than saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this? Is there any need to say, no, we will accept X, so that, politically it becomes a more feasible position? Or is it the case that, if we just say, don't do this, don't do that, then what happens? I mean, there's a lot of people, there's a reason why, for example, why they're now going ahead with the 270 widening. And it seems that, in terms of advocacy, CABE succeeded, but don't widen 270 did not succeed. So I'm just trying to or think through what the political equities are here?
So we work with a group called don'twiden270.org, and we're working with them to try and stop it from the American Legion Bridge all the way up to I-370. And one of the points that both of our organizations make is that we've seen, because of the pandemic, that you can dramatically reduce congestion by taking a small number of cars off the road. And this is research that the Maryland Transportation Institute at the University of Maryland has done, that you can take 5% of the cars off the road and it will reduce congestion by 38 to 50%. So one of the things we've argued is that rather than adding toll lanes, we should be, our policymakers should be looking to create incentives with employers to adopt more telework. And we also know that the federal government, that President Biden has also is also trying to move the federal government into a place where they're doing more telework on a permanent basis. So that's a better option, in our view, than adding toll lanes anywhere or adding lanes anywhere. But if we're going to do anything with the American Legion Bridge, and when it is renovated, it ought to include rail. So that's the alternative. And I'll just note that in addition to the Maryland Transportation Institute, in 2017, the Transportation Planning Board looked at a series of options for reducing congestion in the area. And they also said that telework was the best option. That if you really did an intense telework proposal to really drive down, that small number of cars, that would be the best option for reducing congestion.
Now, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't one of the big concerns with the P3 is that it's being sold as a zero cost, project, versus a transit project that is, pretty affordable in the grand scheme of things, like, adding an additional track and additional service to the MARC corridor could really make, is far less expensive once you consider the total costs, including utility relocation, tolls, and potentially the other state costs if we're on the hook at the end of this, such that it kind of don't we need to make that financial argument that there are a lot of transit projects with a far better ROI once you consider the full costs.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of, these P3 public-private partnerships really have not panned out the way their proponents have said they would. That this was going to be free transportation for everybody, and what the Department of Transportation has reported over the years looking at these projects is that really many of them require subsidies in some form or another, in addition to the tolls. So it's not a free ride. And even Governor Hogan, Nancy Koch, who until December was the state treasurer, and she by law was required to look at the pre-development contract, the design contract that the state signed with Transurban. And that design contract lays a lot of the groundwork for the eventual construction contracts. And her report was basically, there are a lot of uncertainties here as to the risk, the financial risk, and the payoff, the benefits to Maryland residents. She actually asked the governor for $100,000 so that she could hire the state's bond counsel and the state's financial advisors to look at this pre-development contract and to assess the financial risks. He refused to give her the money to do that. MDOT has also refused to provide the Maryland General Assembly with a cost benefit analysis comparing whether it's more financially advantageous to do a public-private partnership or to do it through regular public procurement methods. And, MDOT promised the Maryland General Assembly that they would provide this comparison, this cost benefit analysis, like 2.5 years ago. And as of now, they're telling the Maryland General Assembly, we'll give it to you after the final environmental impact statement is done. In other words, we're not going to give it to you before we negotiate our contracts. So they seem to be hiding something, or at least they're not forthcoming, and it makes you suspicious about using public-private partnership for this endeavor.
I would like to also add something to what Pam is saying about, Barbara is saying about the P3 is of note is that Transurban, the same company who currently has the P3 concessions in Virginia, and this is something that Ben Ross discovered through research, they extracted from the state of Virginia a special clauses that if in the future the state pursues transit initiatives that in any way would reduce the projected toll revenues, then the state will have to pay penalties. So, that's one caveat emptor that we need to be very, very wide open about this, because it's like they just want a recipe so that for decades you don't have any competition of any mode of transportation that would in any way diminish their harvesting of toll revenues. Also, on the very logical point that Sunil pointed out in terms of logical concessions into the argument, let's reflect that on the I-270 corridors, we have had for a couple of decades very serious plans of how to expand MARC service, the Brunswick line. Which, if you look at the I-270 corridor, I mean, to me, it's unthinkable how could you embark on a large transportation improvement project without looking at all modes of transportation along that corridor. And the study for the P3 deliberately excluded any calculations, any consideration of how increasing MARC or doing, the corridor forward plan, who has been on the shelves gathering dust for decades, could do to improve, the congestion conditions. And I have, look at the numbers, and it's interesting that the projections in the horizon for the P3 along I-270, the traffic increases. A big chunk of that traffic increase could have been taken if they do something about the Brunswick line improvements along I-270 corridor. So, I mean, it's a matter of, we're dealing with a project that's from the beginning, it's written out that this is about how many toll lanes I need to put, and nothing else. No land use changes, no teleworking incentive, nothing. It's just like, putting 2 lanes on each direction of toll lanes, and so they are really close to looking at any options. So
yeah, that very, very good point about MARC. And I take heart from the legislature's override of the veto of the governor to actually allow a thorough study, I guess it is. I'm not totally sure, but of run-through operations where MARC could go to Union Station and continue through under it and over the Potomac and into Alexandria and into Virginia and vice versa, which makes so much sense. Does anybody have a good update on that?
Delegate Solomon is planning, who is the lead sponsor of that legislation, should be joining us momentarily here.
Oh,
Hopefully he can give
good.
us the whole 9 yards on it. So expect that. Any additional questions for Barbara before we move on to another issue here?
I just would make the point that you can call the offices, but you could also email them. And I don't have the emails, but they'll respond and be sensitive to emails as well. So Barbara, do you think that the lack of greenhouse gas analysis and environmental justice analysis will be fixed in the final EIS that's coming out soon, I guess?
Well, so, yeah, so the final EIS will not include a greenhouse gas emissions analysis of the operation of the toll lanes. They're going to put in the final environmental impact statement an analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions from construction activity, but not the operation of the lanes, which is ridiculous. And they are planning to put an environmental justice analysis in the final environmental impact statement. The problem is that in order to meet the spirit of National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, they're supposed to share this information with the public at a point in time that gives the public an opportunity to review it and comment on it, right? To respond to what they're seeing in the environmental impact statement, and then to inform final decisions. Well, that's not what they're doing. They're putting it in the final environmental impact statement after the decisions have been made. So they're not sharing information with the public about environmental justice to shape decisions on how this is going to the final product, the final decisions on this project. And the same thing with emissions from construction activity. So yes, they're going to share that information, but not in a way that allows the public to comment on it, to influence the project. And that really is a violation of the National Environmental Policy Act. And it's a violation of rules that the US Department of Transportation has for evaluating these environmental impact statements. So that, again, is why we think the federal government has a good reason to say, this isn't good enough, Marilyn.
So if they do this without adequate consultation and public comment and so forth, is there anybody ready to do what delayed the purple line so much, which was to file suit? In the purple line cases, it was without merit, but there might be some merit in the case of the toll lanes.
So there are attorneys who are looking at this who agree that there is merit. And so I think that it is entirely probable that we'll see a lawsuit filed. But any attorney who's done this kind of litigation will tell you that it's sort of the choice of last resort. Better if we stop this politically than to hang our hat on the outcome of a lawsuit.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. I'm sure we'll have some continued discussion here if you're able to stick around with us, but I want to make sure we get around to some additional issues. Still waiting on Delegate Solomon here. So I twisted Greg Sanders' arm a little bit to give a little update on the purple line, if you don't mind. Hopefully some exciting movement in the near future. Greg, we're not hearing you. Can you?
While Greg does that, Jared just entered our waiting room, and he's entering the meeting.
Oh, wonderful.
Anything now? No?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Since Jared just joined us, I don't know, Jared, are you in Delegate Solomon, thank you so much for joining us. Are you in a rush to move on to the next thing, or can we continue with our next update with the purple line here?
No, go for it. Thanks, Sean.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks, Greg.
So as you may recall, the last update I did was right before we actually got the solid details of what had happened. And so, a deal was reached. The main news coming out was that the purple line is now estimated for completion in winter of 2026. Full construction activity is now estimated to be in summer of this year. So in essence, there's been some slippage. As far as we understand it, that's driven by closing the financing, not any disagreements over implementation or the like. So Dragados and OHL, which together are Meriden Transit Solutions, will be taking over that work. And similarly, we have a little bit better understanding of the progress that happened during the Meriden portion. A great deal of progress on utility relocation, design 95% done, and relatively unique for major transit projects. The cars are all ready, essentially, and being transferred over to Elmira. In fact, there's even an order of a couple more that was part of a closing deal, because the designer, CAF, which is a Spanish firm, is now part of the Purple Line Transit Operators. So I think part of closing that deal was buying a few more cars. So the broad scheduling details: fall of 2023, the maintenance facility of the Glen Ridge Yard will be able to start taking delivery on the light rail vehicles. Summer of 2024, the test track will be complete, or should be complete. Local testing. Winter of 2025, construction should be complete, and system-wide testing will commence. The good news there is that it looks like the Maryland and the concessionaire are exploring again the option to reopen the trail during that period, because with construction done and trains running back and forth, it should be much safer and does not raise a variety of problems. I don't think we have a solid promise on that yet, but everything is looking positive in that direction. Otherwise, I had a chance to go up to Baltimore last week, and there was a briefing to the Washington Area Railway Engineering Society that Matt Pollock did. One main thing he covered was that essentially one of the key advantages for Meriden for doing the P3 and sticking with it was that, one, they sort of ran through about 200 million in construction as they were finishing off the light rail cars and the utility location work and the like. Part of the P3 advantage in this case is essentially that it doesn't count as state debt. So it doesn't count against bondholders and the like, because while the state ultimately is repaying the TIFIA loan through the availability payments once the line is operational, there is no direct recourse. Essentially, the debt is held by a private concessionaire. So from a bondholder perspective, it doesn't count as Meriden debt. And so similarly, the choice to have Meriden take it over would probably have involved staffing up notably, which is a little bit of work, might be some time. Matt Pollock thought it would also take more time. I mean, I think given the amount of time it ultimately did take, you can wave your hand on public procurement processes as an alternative. But I think one of the biggest appeal, probably for the governor, was that aside from probably not being that excited about staffing up MDOT, was that the financing continues to not count as merit financing, even if the total amount might be more expensive in some ways. So that's sort of a broad topics, that when Meriden was taking it over, they initially got a full range of contracts and kind of quickly evaluated what they could afford to pay for about 200 million. That also helped determine some of what bridges and tunnels they could take on, in addition to the difficulties of the implementation. And while we are still waiting on full construction resumption, as I mentioned, we're not hearing any rumors of challenges of like. Probably, I suspect, larger economic climate, unstable interest rates and are making finance close a little harder. And so, yeah, I think that about covers it. So any questions on Purple Line Max? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. If anyone later wishes to go deep, oh yeah, and I should say one other thing, the biggest thing was the kind of change in the contract was new accelerated dispute resolution mechanisms aimed to hash out problems early rather than having them fester as they did in the original agreement, and removal of the 1 year no delay, no fault exit provision. That provision is one that, in part because of the lawsuit, the concessionaire, Flora in this case, sorry, the builder, I should say, Flora could walk away without having any potential liability. About 8 months of that was used up the lawsuit alone. The other 4 months happened through various reasons. That provision is out. And I think the question of whether to remove that provision was one of the big factors that influenced, or that Meriden was trying to fight for and trying to make a new deal with the old concessionaire. And they were ultimately not interested in making that deal, or at least not. Secretary Slater's statement had said essentially, we're but we're willing to pay more. That is not a problem, but they don't want to be in a position where they're held over a barrel again. And the deal they got in this case, removes that provision. So ultimately, there's still questions about how much you can truly transfer risk to a P3. And I think there's a variety of arguments about that. But the mechanism that proved to be such a challenge has been dealt with. There's been some interesting articles on that part. I'll share one for Construction Dive. Also an interesting Eno Center article on the argument for doing transit projects in smaller chunks, even if you're doing them all at once. Though again, that's to effectively do that for something like the Baltimore Red Line, you would probably have to manage to up, MTA capacity a fair amount in-house. It's not something where you can just, a general contractor will help, but ultimately you need a fair amount of staff capacity and internal understanding for those sorts of mechanisms to work.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for sharing that. And I'm sure we'll have more questions coming up here, but I do want to make sure we get to Delegate Solomon, who I know has had an incredibly busy week already, and it's only Tuesday. We already had some discussion earlier about MARC as, and the potential there on the Brunswick line as an alternative to, widening I-270. And then, I also understand that 7 minutes before midnight last night, you passed that Safe Walk to Schools Act too. So we'd love to hear a little bit on that front as well, if you're willing to share. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and whoever put that in the chat. Yeah, it feels like Thursday. Can't believe it's only Tuesday. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you all tonight. A lot of really familiar faces here. It's good to see everybody. Hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe we'll be able to do this in person sometime soon. But yeah, so as Sean mentioned, last night was sort of more of the traditional sine die than we've had probably in the last couple of years. So, in the ever wonderful tradition of the late night last day of session, the Maryland General Assembly, we literally go until midnight and we literally pass bills until midnight. We passed, I think, a conference report on some updates to the overhaul in criminal justice and policing reform legislation that we passed last year, literally at 11:59. So we worked up until the confetti and the balloons dropped. And as Sean mentioned, I was particularly excited. Most of the sort of big stuff, frankly, that I was working on this year was already sort of settled long before sine die, which was wonderful, including the MARC bill, which I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, at 11:53, we were able to get Safe Walk to School Act, something that should not really have been controversial, should have gotten through probably a year or two ago if it hadn't been for COVID, but pass it at 11:53. Definitely make a whole lot of progress on improving walkability and safety for our kids to be able to walk and bike to school. So that was really exciting, and that's something, frankly, that came directly out of a conversation with advocates in Montgomery County. I'm sure many of you know Christy Daphnis, who chairs the pedestrian and bike safety committee for the county. She and I had breakfast at IHOP in Wheaton a couple of years ago, and that bill was a direct result of that conversation. Something as simple as, when school districts build a new school or expand an existing school, it requires them to actually have a pedestrian safety plan and to engage the community in it and to work with county and state transportation officials. So it's not a panacea, and the Senate committee narrowed the scope of the bill a little bit, much to our chagrin. But it is certainly a significant step forward, and we think will make hopefully a big difference. And it's definitely a step in the right direction. So I was really excited to see that get over the finish line 7 minutes before midnight, and fingers crossed it was near unanimous in our chamber and unanimous in the Senate. So hopefully we won't have to worry about Governor Hogan vetoing the bill. It'd be great if he would sign it, but I won't hold my breath on that one. But what I was really excited to talk to you all about tonight is the Maryland Regional Rail Transformation Act, which we passed overwhelmingly in both chambers a couple of weeks ago now. We got it to the governor's desk before the presentment deadline, which means he's got to make a decision on bills before the end of session. So this year in particular, it was really critical to get sort of the big controversial topics and items to him as early as possible, because since we're in the last year of a term, anything that he vetoes, unless we were to come back for a special session, which seems more and more less likely, depending obviously on the outcome of the legislative maps, those bills die. So ordinarily in the first or second or third year of a term, we could come back the following legislative session, override the vetoes, and typically, those of you who have spent a lot of time in Annapolis know, January and February, usually our big votes are just veto overrides. Well, this year, those bills would die. And we'd have to start all over again with a new General Assembly and a new governor. So it was really important that we got these things out ASAP. And so, credit to Speaker Jones and President Ferguson. They understood how important this bill was, and they made it a priority of leadership as well. And we were able to get it to the governor. He promptly vetoed it, and within 2 or 3 days, we overrode his veto with actually including the minority leader, Delegate Buckle, who represents Western Maryland, also voted to override his veto. So it was a very nice sight to see. This bill was, sort of one of the rare things that brought together Republicans and Democrats, the environmental community, transportation and transit advocates, the business community, labor. There really was almost nobody in the state that was not in favor and supporting this bill. So it was really, really gratifying to see that. And frankly, I think is probably, one of the biggest expansions of the MARC rail system that we've seen in decades. So what the bill does, and it's sort of a direct result of work that we started back in 2020. So one of the last bills actually that we passed, it literally was the last bill in 2020 before we adjourned early because of COVID, was a bill to sort of get the ball rolling on MARC run-through service into Delaware and to Virginia. So, you all, I don't have to tell you all the details of this, but you know that Virginia has embarked on a complete upgrade and replacement of the Long Bridge, which is one of sort of the linchpins, along with the now Frederick Douglass Tunnel, the BNP Tunnel in Baltimore, to dramatically expanding service on the Northeast Corridor. And so, Virginia has sort of figured out how to unlock partnership with CSX. And in 2019, they announced a $4 billion partnership between CSX, Amtrak, and the state of Virginia to dramatically increase rail on the Northeast Corridor to upgrade and replace the Long Bridge, and then expand Amtrak into into North Carolina. And what's amazing about that for Maryland is the additional capacity on the Long Bridge will give us an opportunity to start running MARC trains into Virginia through Crystal City to Alexandria, and then vice versa for VRE trains. And we know, I mean, obviously with Amazon moving into Northern Virginia, we want to be able to, capture a lot of that economic development. We want people to move to Montgomery County to be able to, hop on a one train ride or a one seat ride into Virginia. And we want, folks in Virginia to be able to go up to Baltimore, to Hopkins, to, to the biotech corridor along 270 without having to get into their car. And so in 2020, we passed this bill to sort of start that process, to get MDOT to engage with Virginia, to get MDOT to engage with Delaware and the District of Columbia to sort of start negotiating an MOU. And they were responsible for giving us a report that ultimately didn't get to us until about December of this past year. So that 2020 bill was vetoed. We overrode it in 2021, so the timeline sort of got pushed back. And what we saw when we got this report back was, frankly, that MTA and MDOT hadn't made a whole lot of progress. We believe that the folks at MTA actually want to do what we've been working with them on. We just don't think that there's really any push from the governor. And certainly the new Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Ports, does not seem all that interested in rail. I think to his credit, Secretary Slater, while we may not have agreed on the Beltway and 270 widening, he was an all of the above kind of guy, and was really excited to work with Virginia to kind of embrace what they had done, take those lessons and bring them to Maryland. So it was frankly a little bit disappointing when he left, because I think he was pushing MTA and pushing the agency in a really positive direction. And I think we've lost a lot of that momentum with Secretary Ports. And so even before this report came out, what we had sort of come to the conclusion of was that we were just not ready. MDOT and the state of Maryland were not ready to take advantage of what is potentially billions of dollars at the federal level to expand rail. A lot of the projects that we've outlined in this legislation are things that have been on the books in one form or another in planning documents for sometimes upwards of 2 or 3 decades. Things like expanded, third track on the Brunswick line, or run-through service into Delaware, or a 4th track on parts of the Penn line, or additional stations on certain parts. And what we always see is just these planning documents at, sort of 35,000 feet, but no details, and no action on the part of MDOT to get us to a place where these things actually can become reality. And what was particularly frustrating was, we know that the opportunity for this federal money is not going to be around forever. Frankly, within the next 2 or 3 years, most of the applications to, the Federal Railroad Administration and to the Department of Transportation are going to be due. And if we are not in a place where we can say, this money, this is how we're going to spend it. We have design plans ready to go. We actually have, investment documents that show how we're going to put this money to use. We're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And so this was sort of the year where we needed to, put the rubber to the road, so to speak, and say, all right, here are the priorities that we've got for these big, once in a generation expansion opportunities for rail. And we actually need to make the investments in them to show that we're serious. So, if you look at the bill, what we basically outlined was sort of a couple of key areas where we want MDOT to start actually putting pen to paper and starting to design plans. And so, the end result in the final bill that became law is a couple of items. So there's things in there, 30% design on a 4th track on the Penn line. A new infill station in Elkton to basically bridge that connection between Hartford and Cecil County and Delaware, and open up sort of that whole corridor, which is actually the only remaining part of the Northeast Corridor that does not have rail. It's like that. There's a 20-mile gap between Perryville in Maryland and Newark, Delaware, and so this will enable that gap to be closed and spur sort of the whole universe of development and access to rail there. And that's actually really close. The unfortunate thing with Virginia is, in that 2020 bill, we had actually asked them to start looking into even just running pilot, maybe 2 trains a day. It does not seem like there's capacity on the Long Bridge right now to do that. But again, we want to make sure that when that Long Bridge is open, give or take probably around 2030, that all of the investments, all of the infrastructure, all of the partnership agreements between Virginia and Maryland are ready to go, so as soon as the Long Bridge is open, we can start running trains as soon as possible. Delaware, there was a little bit of a hiccup. Apparently the state was considering making significant upgrades to the Newark station. They've decided to put that on hold. So our hope is that actually trains could be run into Delaware fairly quickly. It's more of a sort of a capacity and scheduling issue as opposed to having to build significant new infrastructure. So, we may be able to start with at least just a few trains a day, pretty soon is our hope. And so again, this bill outlines, I mentioned the Elkton station, I mentioned the fourth track on the Penn line. One of the other things we put in was the 30% design for a new Bayview station at the Hopkins Bayview campus in Baltimore, in East Baltimore. I think it's 30% design for Germantown station improvements on the Brunswick line. And then the original bill actually had a significant design point for the Brunswick line. Unfortunately, we wound up having to take that out because it just wound up being ungodly expensive. The Brunswick line third track is actually less far along than we originally thought. MDOT had not done a ton of work on that, so instead we put essentially a concept plan together that they're required to give us, so that'll sort of be the next step. But what is exciting on the Brunswick line, even separate from this bill, a number of us have been working with MTA really since last summer and the fall, and hopefully later this spring, MTA is going to unveil what they're calling the Brunswick Line Master Plan. And so there's a number of service improvements and upgrades that they're planning on doing. They gave us sort of a preview of this in the fall that they can do just with the rolling stock that we have right now. So they can, increase headways. They want to start piloting weekend service. And I think they're just waiting for sign off and final agreement from CSX. So, between that and then the concept plan, we believe that'll get us to a point where, we'll be able to advance the third track in a couple of years. But the other really important thing that we did was we required MDOT to essentially put together investment plans that are 5-year documents. And the idea behind them is really that, again, what we constantly see is these high-level documents. So some of you may be familiar with the cornerstone plans that MTA updates for MARC, every 4 or 5 years. But again, these are sort of, sweeping high-level documents that never have any detail. They don't have ridership studies. They don't have models with them. They never say sort of, here are the investments step by step that you need to make each year in order to reach the sort of bigger goals that are laid out. And so the idea behind these investment plans is exactly that they essentially become, roadmaps for the General Assembly or for, future administrations within MDOT to put together capital documents that actually say, all right, this year we need to make $10 million worth of upgrades to signals. Next year we need to buy another 15 sets of locomotives or rolling stock. The following year we need to budget for, a siding to be able to add capacity here. And then really give us, again, these sort of step-by-step documents so we know what the investments need to be. And then the last piece in the bill, as it related directly to rail, was a longer term sort of analysis of those cornerstone documents, of the MARC cornerstone plan, which again are these sort of like 25 or 30-year vision documents, but really giving us details about what it would take to make what's in those cornerstone plans reality. So that, we as the General Assembly, again, hopefully with an administration starting next year that's a little bit more friendly to this kind of work, that we really know what it's going to take. So, again, our hope is that with, the design work that's going to be required in this bill, we are going to be able to turn around next year or, the year after, again, with hopefully, fingers crossed, a new administration, that will allow us to apply for federal money and will allow us to potentially do the rest of the work on the Penn line. With federal resources, or build those stations, or do the Brunswick line improvements. I really think Maryland is at sort of the epicenter of rail. Given the work that we're doing on the BNP tunnel, given the massive renovations that are going to be going on at Union Station, the improvements at Penn Station in Baltimore, the Long Bridge. This is really where rail is. Where we're making the best improvements. And we're lucky that we have a president who, probably more so than any elected official in the country, knows the importance of the Northeast Corridor and that connection. And I think most folks would agree that while the MARC system has really good bones, it's probably one of the most underutilized and underinvested tools or resources that we have in the state. In so many places, MARC stations are literally parking lots or grassy fields with a platform. So we had another bill. So there was sort of a group of us. It was myself and Senator Beidel who introduced this bill, but we worked really closely with Delegate Jazz Lewis from Prince George's County and Senator Malcolm Augustine, and then Delegate Corman. The five of us sort of began working with the Greater Washington Partnership and our partners in this back in the fall. And the companion bill that we introduced as well that unfortunately did not pass was a transit-oriented development fund bill. So the idea was, our bill would sort of create the expanded service, and their bill would help seed, the additional development in stations all over the state. It wouldn't have just been limited to MARC. It would have been any station that was designated as TOD by MDOT. So unfortunately, again, that bill didn't pass, but I think we'll probably take another crack at it next year. But I think, frankly, this is one of the most important expansions that we've done. Again, I think in the last 10 or 20 years, it could really lead to an incredible unlocking of potential. And, I think our goals for the next couple of years, I'll wrap up with this. Delegate Corman introduced sort of it was more of a messaging, start the conversation bill around creating a separate rail authority in the state. And then his bill proposed that we would fund rail authority essentially with any money from tolls in the state that wasn't used to cover debt service. That bill didn't pass this year, also would have required some toll increases. But again, it was really meant to start the conversation about, okay, now that, hopefully with our bill passing, we're going to have, again, a, full roadmap to what investment plans are going to be needed for MARC expansion. Well, how are we going to pay for that? And so the one thing that we did add to our bill before it was passed was a work group to essentially look at the Transportation Trust Fund and try to figure out innovative ways to make sure it's fully solvent, even separate from the rail conversation. Obviously with the gas tax and the rise of electric and hybrid vehicles, we're not bringing in the kind of revenue that we once did. And so I think this is part of a broader conversation around, what are sustainable ways to fund transportation in the state. And we've got a lot of really creative ideas that do not directly take money out of the pockets of Marylanders. But I think that's for another year. But again, I think we made tremendous progress. I'm really pleased at how, frankly, leaders from across the state came together on this. And I'm going to drop in the chat. Some of you may have seen Luz Laszlo from the Washington Post wrote a really great piece that was in the Metro section on Monday that I think did a really good job of, again, kind of outlining these issues. So with that, Sean, happy to take some questions. And again, thanks for being here tonight, everybody.
Thank you so much. Any questions either in chat or verbally here?
Hey, this is Ron Bosmalik. First, want to say great job on the bill. I think this is a really good bill. I wanted to ask what we can do over the coming years to kind of keep the momentum going and make sure that these things are followed through on. Like you said, a lot of plans come out. I guess bills probably get passed, but what is the real accountability measures that we can push forward to make sure that the MARC improvements are really happening? And especially, if we don't get a super pro-transit governor, I don't really know the governor's stances, or a lot of the candidates' stances on transit. But I think it really requires a push from the governor. If you get a very pro-transit governor, it just makes everything way easier. But in the absence of that, how can we kind of make sure and keep the DOT accountable?
Yeah, Ron, that's a great question, and honestly, I'll say thank you to all of you. Groups like ACT, frankly, are holding all of us accountable. The folks in the General Assembly, the administration. I think we do have an opportunity this year, obviously with such a breadth and I think a distinction between candidates of really making sure that if folks don't have robust plans at this point, that we push them to make them. And again, I don't see this as a partisan issue. Whether it's Kelly Schultz looks like she's leading on the Republican side, or if it's any number of great candidates that we have on the Democratic side. Kelly was the Commerce Secretary, and again, this was supported by basically every major business organization in every corner of the state. These MARC investments should not be partisan. Again, I don't understand Hogan. Governor Hogan seems to be only singularly focused on building roads. It was sort of funny in the veto override, in the veto letter, he pointed to record levels of funding in MTA investments. Well, the only reason he did that is because we forced him to, with the State of Good Repair bill that we passed 2 years ago. He is forced, the administration is forced to invest, potentially upwards of $600 million a year to get MTA back to a state of good repair on all of its service lines. I don't think it should be partisan. So I think for this year, it's incumbent on groups like ACT and other partner groups across the state to, put together and make sure that every candidate, has a rail plan, and is committing to making those investments if they win. I think going forward, it's just keeping on top of us, holding your General Assembly representatives accountable. I think, again, we're lucky. I don't know one person in Montgomery County that doesn't support this kind of work. And we are really lucky, besides me, Delegate Corman obviously serves on the Appropriations Committee and is in the position, as chair of the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee that he oversees, all of the transportation budgets. We're really lucky on the Senate side that Senator Zucker is the capital budget chair. So we have leadership in sort of all the right places in the General Assembly, and Senator Feldman is the vice chair of finance, which oversees sort of the rail policy stuff. And then on the House side, Delegate Barve from Rockville and Gaithersburg is the chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee, and he came over to me. We were at a meeting together yesterday, and just said, I'm so excited that we passed this rail bill. And this bill did not go to T&E. This was only in appropriations because it was more just pure investments. But, he's like, I'm just really excited. I'm thrilled that we're making progress. And he's like, let's just keep going. So I think we're really lucky in Montgomery County that we've got folks who really get it. And so it's just keeping on top of us. You all, frankly, are experts. I was going to say, Greg's report on the Purple Line sort of jogged my memory on a couple of things. But, again, we're really blessed in Montgomery County to have folks who, in their spare time, do the kind of expertise work that makes our lives and our jobs a lot easier. But again, it's, I think, building those connections with partners around the state, and continuing to grow the coalition, because that's, I think, what made our bill so successful. Was that we had folks, from Western Maryland, Frederick, all the way to Cecil and Harford County, and everything in between, who are saying that this was really important.
So if I may ask a question, I'm always interested in the small ball things we can be doing, and whether this bill has opened any doors to that, either just in the conversations or in the bill itself, to things like, BRE and MARC have the same app platform. We come up with a joint fare table for people to connect at Union Station, to connect through. And I think even if we do start through Reading, that may not come to the Brunswick line right away. And so how can we coordinate schedules? I mean, the crazy thing being that the first Brunswick line train in the morning arrives 10 minutes after the last reverse commute BRE train leaves. And things like that, where, you could just, even if it were just cross-platform transfer, you get off the MARC train onto the BRE. What opportunities do you see in that small ball regard?
Yeah, I mean, so Sean, that's another great question. I mean, those are all things, frankly, that MTA should be doing. And that was sort of part of the conversation of the bill that we passed in 2020. They didn't really start working on it until 2021. We're going to take MTA, at least initially. I don't want to say we're taking them at their word, but they have told us, Holly Arnold, who is the new MTA administrator, cares a lot about this. And they have been, in active conversations and negotiations with Virginia. This bill sort of lays out even clearer details about what they're expected to do. They're getting closer and closer to signing an MOU with Virginia, is our understanding, that will hopefully start the actual nuts and bolts of a lot of this. And, in our conversations with the Federal Railroad Administration, they care a lot about making this happen as well, and have been good at facilitating the conversations between Virginia and Maryland, and the Greater Washington Partnership, who has been really our key ally in this, has done an amazing job of helping facilitate that connection as well. And it's our sense that even with the new Virginia administration, with Governor Youngkin, that they care as much about rail as as the prior ones had. I think I think that's been sort of the key in Virginia, is that rail has not been partisan in their state. Both Republican and Democratic administrations over the last 15, 20 years have made this a priority. So that's our hope, that even if we can't start running trains, that we get everything from the big things to, platform heights that may require some actual capital investments to things like creating a uniform app or, branding service together. And again, one of the cool things that the Greater Washington Partnership did, and for those rail nerds, which is probably most of you here, the Greater Washington Partnership convened essentially a regional work group that I was a part of that had local elected officials, state elected officials, civic leaders, business leaders from across the region, from Baltimore all the way down to Richmond. And we came up with, we issued a couple of different documents, I guess probably about a year ago now, that was sort of a high level view of what unified all day connected service could mean for the region, and then really got into the nuts and bolt details of what that would look like. And so, the GWP has been just really, really wonderful at bringing together the various, actual stakeholders, the rail administrators and the engineers and the folks who deal with those kind of details. And they're not going anywhere. This is, I think, their top transportation priority. So I'm hopeful that in the next year or two, we'll see a lot more progress made on things like that.
All right, thank you. And I know we're coming up towards the top of the hour. Maybe we could squeeze in one more question for Delegate Solomon. All right. I know I originally solicited any other pitches on additional issues. Anybody else have something to share before we close the door here? Of course, we hope to be back together in person next month.
John, I did just want to say one other thing. I forgot to mention actually at the tail end of Greg's report. We all are very closely monitoring the Purple Line. I'm sure most of you saw, Delegate Corman convened an oversight hearing that we participated in from the Appropriations Committee of MTA. Again, feels like ages ago. It was, I guess, mid-end February, earlier in session. And I know Greg mentioned getting the trail opened as soon as possible. That's been a huge priority for us. One of the things I was really disappointed in, we had secured, I think it was actually at a Purple Line Now meeting in Chevy Chase, we had secured a commitment from the prior contractor to open the trail as early as possible. Obviously, that commitment slipped when the concessionaire changed, but we have every time I talk to MTA about the Purple Line, I bring that up, and I've mentioned it to Secretary Ports as well. So hopefully we will get that commitment from them shortly to open the trail as soon as they can, even before the train line officially opens. So we're on top of that, and please keep particularly Delegate Corman and I in the loop on things as they come up, so we can hold MTA accountable.
Well, thank you all so very much for joining us for this. Kathy, is there anything? Thank you to Delegate Solomon and to the candidates and to everybody who participated in the conversation. Anything else to add before we wrap things up, Kathy?
No, save the date for our next meeting, May 10th. It may be back in person at the Silver Spring Civic Building. So look out for that in the meeting notice, whether it will be in person or on Zoom again. We don't want anybody to go in person and miss us.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your week.